Hi everyone, welcome back to NarraScope. Please make sure to stay maxed during the theater and in all of the convention spaces. The first talk is by Nat and Elana. Without further ado.
Hello. Hey, how did everybody sleep? Oh, awesome. Okay, so thumbs ups across the board. Amazing. I'm so excited to be speaking at NarraScope. I came for the first time last year and I was like, wow, I would love to, share a bit about what I do. And now I'm in this gigantic theater with a very large, this is the largest I've ever had my slides be shown to anyone. So yay. I am also feeling awesome. So I'm up here with my co-designer Elana, and we have this talk to co-present to you, so you'll be hearing from both of us. It is called Big Story, Tiny Engine, Hacking Bitsy to Tell Rich, Puzzle-Driven Stories. So I'm going to be talking about the stories, Elana's going to be talking about the puzzle-driven, and together you'll get a post-mortem on our prototype for this game we designed called Band Together. But before I get into that, we'll introduce ourselves and we'll go from there. So I'm going to go first, then I'll hand off to Elana. I am Nat Mesnard, pronouns they, them. I am our lead narrative designer in our two-person tiny indie, Unquiet Games. I'm a published writer of literary fiction, poetry, and creative nonfiction. I've taught university level and continuing education courses in game design and interactive fiction for the last 7 years. Primarily in Pratt Institute's Game Design and Interactive Media program, though I also teach some classes at School of Visual Arts and Rutgers Camden. I also work professionally in the tabletop industry with 9th level games and restoration games, and also through the Small Game Press I co-founded last year, Scripted Games, which is not shown here, but I'll talk about it later.
And hi, I'm Elana. She, her. I'm the lead technical designer for this project. I worked in the tech industry for nearly a decade, mostly as a UI engineer, before deciding I didn't want it to eat what remained of my soul. So now I split my time between my work with Nat at Unquiet Games and another technical game design role at Bolero Game Studio. Some fun stops along the way include developing an arcade installation for the Wonderville Barcade in Queens, designing an escape room for a women-owned escape business, and creating a multimedia archive of indie game history for the Myst documentary, of which Mr. Andrew Plotkin, I don't know if he's here, has posted some mostly valid critiques on his blog.
Yay, so we're so excited, obviously, and I'm just gonna get right into it. This is our studio. We are Unquiet Games, the two of us. We are a queer trans indie studio making darkly cozy games that engage compassionately with real world issues. So again, we're going to talk about our project today, Band Together, and ooh, that's really loud. But I had a plan for this because I'm very short. I'm going to bring the mic to me. Can everyone hear me okay? Amazing. All right, so we're here to share the insights we've gained on narrative design, metroidbrainia design, and Bitsy development through working on Band Together, which is a first-person narrative puzzle game Elana and I have been developing over the last year. This image is from the Unity version of Band Together, which we're actually working on now. However, our design process began with a full prototype made in Bitsy 3D, and that is what we are here to talk about today. So the talk that we are going to give today, we're going to explore the possibilities and limitations of Bitsy development in this postmortem of our Band Together prototype. We will also get into some stuff about narrative design and how we used narrative design to lay a foundation for a small prototype, and then used that small prototype to lay a foundation for a bigger game that is also a small game, but the bigger game is the one we're working on now in Unity. So I'll be doing these first 3 sections, introducing you to the project, talking about collaborative narrative design, and then there will be an activity. Oh, good response. Yes, Elana's gonna come in also to talk about this metroidbrainia design. We'll have a short callback to the activity in Elana's section. We'll get into takeaways, and then Praying we'll have time to do Q&A because we have 2 people and a lot to say. But before we get into all that, I actually have this awesome trailer for our Bitsy game that Elana made. Again, the biggest my head has ever been. I am going to press play and it's going to skip to the part where Elana's trailer introduces our Bitsy game so that you know what it is. So hopefully this plays as beautifully as it did a minute ago.
You will play as Ruby, a trans college student struggling to balance their schoolwork with their campus activism and distress about the general state of the world. This story is set against the backdrop of banned book speak and budget cuts impacting the collections and staffing of the campus library. When a mysterious scavenger hunt sends Ruby on a quest for answers about the history of banning, burning, and censorship, will they lose themselves in the journey? They maybe, just maybe, find queer love along the way.
All right, yay, woo! And much applause to Elana's amazing editing for that video, and also she wrote the Trebek, I'll take cultural destruction for $200 dialogue line, which I really loved. So that's the game. We made this actually for a game jam. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the process that led us to do this. We went really hard. Let me see if I can get us out of that. Okay, great. So how did we make this? We started working on this at NarraScope last year. We knew we wanted to work together. We came to NarraScope in Pittsburgh last year, and we concepted this game on the way back from Pittsburgh to New York City. We were obviously saturated in the ideas from this conference, and we were great, let's concept a game now. So we spent the whole drive talking about this. We had this idea of making a queer love story set amidst a library treasure hunt and surrounded by the political realities of book banning. We also wanted to take inspiration from some of our favorite games, which were very aligned on the games we like to play. Those games include Outer Wilds, Gone Home, What Remains of Edith Finch, Myst, and Psychonauts. So you'll hear a little bit more about the game and know why Psychonauts is in there. But yes, so we made it for this game jam. It was the CineReach, Anima, South by Southwest Just Play Game Jam for Justice. Elana found out about this through the Women in Games group at Gumbo in New York City. And we had kind of concepted this game and made a little bit of design documentation, but it was really just a concept in both of our heads until she was like, maybe we should make this for this jam. We had originally talked about making this in Unity. I've taught Unity for like forever. I'm very fluent in showing other people how to make Unity games. So I was like, let's use Unity. It's the engine I'm actually the most comfortable in. But we were like, we have 4 weeks to make this game for the game jam. And we decided not to use Unity because we wanted to make something that was done and felt satisfying and successful as like a micro prototype of the thing we were imagining by the end of the game jam, instead of tunneling into making technical systems and ending up with a bunch of pieces at the end of 4 weeks. We also had a lot of game design and narrative design to do. So that is how we ended up using Bitsy. We concluded that working with an easy-to-use, lightweight engine would speed up our prototyping process and focus us on the narrative elements that Bitsy, which is mostly a dialogue and story game engine, prioritizes, instead of tempting us to tunnel into building technical systems. As I said. We were also thinking about other indie games that have begun as simpler projects. So there's many games have started out in simpler engines. This is the game Celeste, which was originally built in Pico 8. Hollow Knight, you may know or not that Hollow Knight, a metroidvania, was originally made as a Flash game. And then our core design inspiration for this game, Outer Wilds, apparently was originally implemented as a text adventure game using an open source Java library called Processing. So they worked out a lot of their early design ideas with a thrilling graphical text adventure that they made. So we thought, let's do something similar. We're going to work in Bitsy. And then once we had decided that, we were like, okay, yes, Bitsy, which version of Bitsy are we going to use? So many of you are probably aware that there are many versions and forks of Bitsy. People have been using Banksy and Bitsy in the NarraScope Game Jam this year. We decided to work with a fork of Bitsy called Bitsy 3D Color by the developer Aura System, which is itself a fork of a different Bitsy 3D that doesn't have color. And we wanted to do this because even though there are limitations in the 3D implementation of this engine, we wanted it to inherit from 3D first-person narrative exploration and mystery games. So we thought if we start in a first-person point of view from the beginning, that will help us lay the right design foundation and framework for the puzzles that we want to get into as the project matures. So this was this challenge we set for ourselves. We wanted to make a small yet complete game that fulfilled our game design goal of being a mini metroidbrainia while also delivering a compelling story. So this is the abstraction of our design ideas. And now, with that introduction, I'm going to actually talk to you a little bit about my perspective as a narrative designer and how I led the process of doing narrative design for Band Together. So I, in my analog game design life, have a lot of experience in the indie TTRPG space. These are some of the games I have written and helped publish. So when Elana and I started working on this digital game, I wanted to take inspiration from the design values I bring to my rules light high concept one-shots, which are some of those on that side, and the queer GM-less story games I publish with my small TTRPG press scripted games. This is our first title. I did not write it, but I helped do everything else, and it is indeed a queer GM-less story game. So thinking about that, I wanted to talk a little bit about GM-less TTRPGs and why that's connected with making a Bitsy game. So if you were talking with me on Friday at the Teachers Talking Turkey about IF workshop, I mentioned this a little bit. I really liked GM-less TTRPGs as a source of scaffolding for leadership. And that could mean project management, it could mean production management, and it could mean teaching. So the cool thing that I think is relevant about games like this is that they are cleverly scaffolded to discourage a central source of authority. And to me, that's important in making a queer game. because we want to have like an equitable power dynamic across two different developers and writers. And it's also part of my values as a teacher. So I'm taking inspiration from games like this. We have Microscope on the left, and we have Fiasco on the right. And these games, if you're not familiar with them, you should definitely check them out. They are classics in the tabletop world and classics of GM-less, which means there's no central authority kind of arbitrating the story. Gameplay. Microscope is a fractal role-playing game of epic histories where you collaboratively role-build a cosmically large history moving from broad time periods to eras to events and eventually scenes. And Fiasco, Jason Morningstar's classic where you engineer and play out stupid, disastrous situations, characteristic of what you might see in a Coen Brothers movie. I don't love the theme of Fiasco, but I like the gameplay. So, okay, what do I take from these games as a teacher, writer, and project manager? All right, so I want to talk about this. This is what I abstract out. There are other things I think you could abstract out from these games, but here's how I see it and draw the line. In games like this that discourage centralized authority and leadership, the story is built piece by piece from modular expository elements, such as qualities, descriptors, items, relationships, or events. Then players take turns creating these expository elements. So we kind of identify like what are the things that you can create. Now we take turns creating them and dictating through choice or random selection which of these elements is true in the canon of the game we're playing right now. So I get unilateral authority on my turn to say something is true, and it's going to be one of these smaller, more granular elements of storytelling. Then the game provides a loose scaffolding for collaboratively deploying these elements to make scenes. While each player may participate differently in scenes and roleplay, depending on personality, ability, and interest, differences in play are downstream of a process that reinforces all players as necessary participants in the process of building a story. So to me, that's sort of how games like Microscope and Fiasco are working. And that is also what I take inspiration from in my classrooms. It's been central to my practice as a teacher for the last 4 or 5 years now. I've been teaching and talking about these ideas. And the other thing about this framework that I think was useful in our project is that it worked really well with deciding to use Bitsy. And the reason why is because I'm the lead narrative designer, Elana's the lead technical designer. I wanted us both to write the story. And because we used an easy to work with game engine to prototype, that meant that even though Elana inevitably pulled a slightly higher load on the technical side, I was able to use this engine without a lot of barriers resulting from a lack of a computer science degree. And she was able to participate in writing the story with me instead of designating me as the person that would write the characters, architect the narrative arc, and tell her what's going to happen inside the engine when it's time to know what the story is. So it was really important to me that we divide up this way and not put us in 2 lanes. And Bitsy was a perfect way to do that. I'm going to skip over these little things because I want to take enough time to actually show you how this would work in practice. And now I have an activity for you so you can play with the framework I just introduced. And she has index cards for you so you can try this out as we speak. Okay, are people ready for this? Woo! All right, great. So I want to make sure there's enough time for you to hear from Elana, so I'm going to take you through this little thing a little bit fast, but it's what I love. I love to teach, and I love to make people participate. There will be 1 index card, and you're going to have a moment to collaboratively write a character with someone else in the room. So if you have an index card, I would love for you to find someone to work with. You're not getting married to this person. You will be working with them for 5 minutes. So don't worry too much about like, oh my gosh, it's stressful. Just find somebody. And if you're on Discord and you're listening to this, if you can find someone to do this with online, you can use your own paper, yes. All right, did everyone find a partner? Great. Online, I hope you're also playing along. You could do this digitally. It's just a writing exercise. Okay, so you have someone to work with, and we're going to create a setting. We'll collaboratively decide this by voting. So our game is about college students. I'm going to have you write a college student character together as well. In fact, you're going to write two, just like we did. We have two characters in our game. Two developers, two characters. Coincidence? I think not. Okay. So we're gonna pick the setting, and we'll take a vote. Do you want these characters to be going to a liberal arts college in the Northeast, or B, a Midwest party school? And if anybody is here from Champaign-Urbana, this is in fact unofficial. In this picture. So like that's a reference there to my grad school, but okay. So option 1, liberal arts college. If you want it to be there, raise your hand. All right. Midwest party school. All right. Great. All right, so Midwest party school. Apologies to liberal arts people. I went to this, but I did not enjoy that. So we're going to use Midwest Party School as a setting. All these students will be going there. And now what I'd love you to do is, I'd like you to each quickly define a character using 2 high concept words, one from list A and one from list B. You'll do this on your own on your index card. So you'll say, I'm going to choose one thing here. What's that? You're good? Okay, great. You could say, okay, let's pick overconfident, right? And then you're going to say, how about poet? You'll write your character high concept at the top of your index card. That's all you have to do. Do that now. Just go with the first one you think of. This is always an interesting choice, but whatever speaks to you, you could have it be like how you were. This doesn't necessarily affect their major. It could be anything. Did people pick something? Great. All right, so next step. You have come up with a character high concept. Now, trade index cards with your partner. So you get theirs, they get yours. All right, so you have their high concept, they have yours. Now I would like you to quickly, first thing that comes to mind, define this character's basic stats. I want name, age, pronouns, major, GPA, and friend group. This can be one word. You could be like, the art queers. Whatever, right? You could say jocks. Doesn't have to be a whole thing. Pick something. I'll give you a few seconds to introspect and make up this person according to the concept you've been given. I'm pressuring people to go quickly, but understand that if you were in my classroom, I would make sure everyone had enough time. All right. Have people written things? I'm giving some thumbs up. Great. Narrative designers in the room. People are like, I can make decisions without creative paralysis. All right. So whatever it is, it doesn't matter. There's no stakes to it. It's not a full lesson. It's just a little snippet. Now you've chosen those things. Switch index cards. All right. So once you've had a minute, yeah, you'll give it to your partner and you'll take it and see what did they write on this? What have they given me? All right. And this is the last step, but of course you can imagine how this would play out. You've got a high concept, you've got some stuff, and now on the index card that you have, you get to do a little bit more writing. You're gonna fill in some story details. You get to pick, what are they running away from? What are they running toward? What is their iconic accessory? And what is their pet peeve? So take a minute to come up with what these things are, and then we'll move on. How are people doing? I see a thumbs up. Who needs 30 more seconds to? Great. Let's take one more minute. Silence of creativity. I love it. All right, I need to pass the mic to Elana because we're going to hear about, in just a minute, how this resulted in game design. But I want to make a couple connections. So I apologize if I'm rushing you because I know different people think at different paces, and sometimes the slower pace results in more depth. So thank you for participating in this. I would like you to give the card back to the original, trade it one more time so you can see what this resulted in. You have now seen most of what you have both written. Take a look. All right, so you've seen it. I would love to, if this resulted in a particularly good character, I'd love a share back. Is there one that was just like, this was the best person I've ever invented? Oh, okay, who is it? Tell me who this person is. Raise your hand if you've met that person. I love this so much. And could I ask you, so what was it like to do that activity? Let's get one more. So we have this, the name was Alexei? Alexei the Film Geek with a 4.0. Could we get somebody that's a little bit of a academic ne'er-do-well who has a lower GPA? Oh, okay, over here. What was his name again? Okay, so we have Stooge and Alexei, and we know how they met. All right, so I'm gonna pass it off to Elana. I wanna just really quickly wrap this up. If we were to continue on, we would explore a little bit more, how would this character talk? I would ask you, do you feel capable of writing dialogue and story on behalf of this person that you co-created? And then in general, I would say from me to you as a speaker at NarraScope, the question I want to ask is what kind of writing and game design might subsequently be enabled by shared authorship? You're about to find out how Elana and I worked together with her under her leadership to then use characters created this way to accomplish game design and actually put together a prototype in Bitsy. I had some examples from our narrative design documentation here that I can flash before your eyes in 15 seconds. These were our character high concepts. We came up with these together. We did basics first, which was the first side of the index card that you worked with. Then we went to details. And one of the things that I did for this is I was like, let's write Lex profiles on behalf of our characters just to see how they would do this. We didn't put this in the game, but this was a very fun activity. This wasn't the one we wrote. It was just an example that we took inspiration from and imagining how they would create a profile on a dating app. So you can see how we are alternated to create those layers. And then from there, we had a big narrative design document, and it was time to create a metroidbrainia.
All right, thank you, Nat. So the fun part of this presentation is over. Now I'm just going to lecture at you about puzzles. I'm going to try to not make it feel that way. But in all seriousness, I am very grateful to Nat for the scaffolding that they created around our shared creative process and for being able to have an equal voice in that. I think it was really a meaningful part of the experience for me. So, okay, we have our characters. In our case, they were Ruby and Carson. And then we needed some kind of ludic structure where their story could unfold. And that's where metroidbrainias come in. First, before we talk about designing them, let's talk about defining them. So I'm actually curious, by show of hands, how many people have heard that specific term before? Not Metroidvania, Metroidbrainia. Okay, all right, it is actually getting around apparently. So like 5 people or so. And of those of you who have never heard of a Metroidbrainia, how many of you kind of feel like you could guess what it probably is? Okay, a lot more people. Yeah, that's what I love about the term. I think it actually does a pretty good job of explaining itself, at least if you're familiar with video games and Metroidvanias. So just to break it down, it's The Metroid part is, the Nintendo Metroid series, brain, so like cerebral puzzles. And the IA, that IA is doing a lot of work there. It's standing in for Castlevania. And together, I don't know, I made up this logo. There's not really a metroidbrainia logo, but it might be something like that. I don't want to stand here and pontificate at you about Metroidvanias. I'm sure plenty of other game designers have already done that. Everyone needs to do it at some point, at least video game designers. But just to make sure we're all on the same page, really quickly, Metroidvania tends to involve 3 core things. One is gear-gated progression, which means that you might have specific doors with specific locks. So like this door has like a purple lock on it, and you can't get through that door until you've collected a specific item, like this wave cannon or beam or whatever it is. And so you need to go around collecting your gear to progress through the game. Another core quality is that the maps of these worlds tend to involve lots and lots of backtracking, just going around and around in circles, kind of peeling back the layers of this onion every time you come back around. There are new things you can do thanks to your new gear. And in general, they are non-linear, but not always. The recent release of Metroid Dread was actually quite linear, even though it tried to make it feel as though it wasn't. So this is not strictly required, but they tend to be non-linear. So yeah, here are a few examples of more modern Metroidvanias that are not Metroid or Castlevania, but just, yeah, Dark Souls, Ori, Hollow Knight, Headlander, these are all examples of Metroidvanias. But that's not what we're making. We're making a Metroidbrainia. And so the main difference here is taking that gear-gated progression and replacing it with knowledge-gated progression. And so as you're learning more things about the world, that's what lets you then loop back and get farther than you could before. It's all just in your head. It does reduce the replayability of that style of game, unfortunately, but it's really fun to watch other people play them once you've played them. So I think that's sort of a hallmark of Outer Wilds. People love to watch other people play Outer Wilds. You can't really play it a second time. And Tunic is another example of, I mean, it's got a lot of other things going on, but it has these Metroidbrainia aspects of like, I don't know what this language means. I think it's telling me how to play the game. Maybe I'll figure it out later, and then I'll discover what my abilities are. I think. I haven't played Tunic yet. So why did we want to use a Metroidbrainia for this project? Apart from the fact that we, were excited about games like Outer Wilds and just wanted to be like them. So we knew we wanted a narrative-rich game with serious political themes. And we realized that if we wanted to align the narrative design and the game design as much as possible, a Metroidbrainia might do that for us, because in both the narrative and the game side, you're trying to learn about the world you're in to progress. And so it requires engagement with the characters and themes and the politics in order just to advance through the game. So we thought for a small narrative-rich game, this might work. So what makes a good Metroidbrainia? What were we trying to aspire to? So I mentioned that it's knowledge-gated. So you should be really curious about collecting that knowledge. There should be curiosity-driven exploration. Also, I mentioned peeling back the layers of an onion. So likewise, in a Metroidbrainia, there should be different layers of knowledge. There are sort of the big mysteries that present themselves to you initially. And then there's sort of the plot twists, the plot thickens as you get a little deeper. And then there's the lowest layer, which are the big revelations that kind of are your payoff for making your way through the game. Kelsey Beecham, the writer for Outer Wilds, gave a great talk about those two things. I would recommend it. And then we also wanted there to be sort of aha moments. So when you make that connection and you're like, oh, that's what that thing meant all along, now it's connecting in my brain, we wanted that to feel really good. Okay, so what are we trying to avoid in a Metroidbrainia? So we don't want lock and key mechanics. Gear-gated progression is kind of a lock and key. Basically, we didn't want you to just have to get this object, bring it over here, and it opens something for you. And we also didn't want what I'm calling event-gated progression. This one is a little harder to define, but basically we talked, for example, there's a phone in the game. So we were like, what if at a certain point in the game you get a text message or a phone call that progresses the game? So we're like, okay, what triggers the text message to arrive at that time? Well, maybe you've done certain things, but that didn't feel organic or satisfying as a puzzle experience because there's no direct logical connection between you've done these things and then you got a text message from your friend. And so we didn't want just like these kind of magical events to gate your progression. And also, in general, like, metroidbrainia shouldn't really be stateful. They shouldn't, like, save files can help, but in general, the save file is in your brain. And that's why I think Outer Wilds works so well as a metroidbrainia, because it's a time loop. You start over again and again. It's almost like roguelike in a way. Okay. Just a quick note on this. Can these two genres coexist? Yes, they can. Animal Well is a recent game that did just that. You play through it as a metroidvania, and then the deeper layers are more kind of metroidbrainia layers. So I would recommend checking that out, but it doesn't have a lot of narrative, so I can't fully recommend it at a narrative conference. Okay, and is this a new genre? So some of you may recognize this from Myst. I think Myst, kind of famously, if you know how to play Myst, you can finish that game in about 5 minutes. If you've already uncovered certain key pieces of information. So that's kind of metroidbrainia, just wasn't calling itself that. Okay, so let's take these ideas about metroidbrainias and try to apply them to the specific challenge we created for ourselves of making a narrative-rich game in a tiny engine. So how do you hide anything in Bitsy? Like, how are you subtle in Bitsy? In Bitsy 2D, you can see everything from a top-down view. There are no corners you can hide things around in Bitsy 2D. In Bitsy 3D, there's a little bit more room to kind of hide things around the corner, but you still have these very small grids that you're working with for your level design. So we came up with a few strategies. The first strategy is needle in a haystack, or in our case, it was more needle in a book stack. So here's an example in Outer Wilds. I don't think this is a spoiler. I take Outer Wilds spoilers very seriously. But basically, this is not going to mean anything to you if you haven't played the game. But this is a place you would probably almost never discover because the solar system is large. You're not going to stumble upon this tiny, unassuming hole. But once you have gotten deeper into the game through other pathways, you might discover that this is a shortcut you can take in the future. So it's sort of hiding in plain sight, but there's just so much stuff that you're probably not going to find it. You're much more likely to find other things first. I think her story is another interesting example. Here, the output space is actually pretty small. It's just a series of video clips, but the potential input space is giant because you're searching for words and phrases, and you've got the whole English language. So, like, knowing what word you might want to enter that's going to bring up the footage that solves the murder mystery is kind of a needle in a haystack, and you need to, use logical deduction and narrative insight to figure that out. And Myst also has some sort of needle in a haystack things where it's like, this book of codes has hundreds of pages. Who knows which code is the right one? And so we had our bookshelves in this library with plenty of books on them, and so that was our haystack. And every kind of hallway you went down had books you could interact with on it, like at least one book on each side that was interactable. Most of those were wrong, and to slow the players down for just like when they tried to guess at random, we would have them solve these little mazes every time they found a wrong book. People actually enjoyed this aspect, which was funny because it was supposed to mostly be a punishment, but people were like, ooh, yay, mazes in a book, that's cool. But that was our needle in a haystack. Okay, another strategy, impossible spaces. What do I mean by that? So here's a scene from Stanley Parable, and that is a very juicy game for game designers, and because it's very meta, very much about game design. And this is a space where you will see a view around one corner, and then you walk around to the other side, and it's not what you saw. it's very disorienting and surreal. And you're kind of following this whimsical path, and you're just getting twisted through these impossible spaces. Sometimes you might turn like a 90-degree corner like 6 times in a row and not end up back where you started. Yeah, so that's a type of impossible space. Psychonauts 2 has this hallway that just kind of extends as you're walking down it. And so we created an impossible space as well. So there's this, it's an impossible courtyard, we called it, where you're walking around this courtyard, and every time you turn a corner and then go back to the courtyard, it is now a different map. It's actually a different interior space. And these are representing different time periods when books were banned or burned. And so in a way, we're just kind of creating a lot of rooms here. It's not that interesting as a strategy, but by connecting them through this sort of surreal logic, it doesn't feel tedious. It doesn't feel like it's just like, oh, another room, another room, another room. It feels more like you're in this one kind of interestingly interconnected space, and you have to figure out that, like, as you walk around the corners, like, the time period is changing. Okay, and final strategy here, Lost Woods is kind of a subcategory of impossible spaces. It's maybe a special case. So Lost Woods referring to the Zelda series. I'm not sure if it started in Ocarina of Time. There might have been one like in the NES Zelda, I'm not sure. But basically, you're just presented with a series of decisions with these kind of identical looking spaces. And it's like, there are 4 paths you can take here. Whichever one you take is going to take you to another space with 4 paths. And eventually you're like, am I making progress or not? Like, what is the rule that I'm trying to follow here? Myst had something like that in one of its most hated puzzles. People try to map this one out on paper sometimes, and you can do that. You can spend hours doing that if you want to. But the idea is that there's a pattern that you're trying to learn. There's that sort of metroidbrainia aspect where maybe you don't actually need to map out every possible route here. Maybe there's a simple rule. And I felt very entitled to use a Lost Woods puzzle because I realized that our design inspiration Outer Wilds also literally has a Lost Woods puzzle. Don't want to spoil anything, but I think this is actually kind of like isomorphically identical to the Lost Woods of Ocarina of Time, which is very interesting. So we had a Lost Woods puzzle, which you may have seen in the trailer. We keep walking through these areas with 4 different pathways. It's actually 6 different rooms. You can see the layouts here are similar, but not the same. And it should just kind of feel like one impossible space with these signs that you're reading. And you're going to keep ending back up at the beginning unless you pay attention to those signs and you learn your lesson about, in this case, authors. Okay, I'm going to do a quick interactive exercise here. So let's try putting one of these into practice. We have our characters, Alexei and Stooge, I think, at a Midwestern party school, I think. So just in this case, I am just going to call on people rather than having you all discuss it. I wish we had more time for that. But let's say we were doing a needle and a haystack puzzle for those 2 characters. Does someone want to give me an idea for what is the haystack? Like, what is the large quantity of things that you might be hiding the needle in? Yes. Incredible. So, I don't know, maybe it's like the campus, like a greenhouse or something. Lots of foliage that's mostly not marijuana. Mostly. All right, well, I think so that tells us what our needle is too. It's the marijuana. So, but there is still another question here, which is how do we find that needle? So what insights do we gain that allow us to locate the marijuana in this maybe large greenhouse? Anyone want to throw out an idea for that? Let's see. Yes. Yes, okay. Maybe you find a textbook that's specifically about cannabis. Yeah, somehow you come into this knowledge. this actually brings up an interesting issue here, which is that people coming into the experience with different levels of prior knowledge are going to have different experiences. So if the player already has an encyclopedic knowledge of cannabis, then they might not need to find that particular book. Cool. All right. That was your turn. All right, now we get 2 takeaways. So this is an interesting one because I just spent a lot of time talking about metroidbrainias, and we kind of made one, but we kind of didn't also. So I'm gonna, give ourselves an honest self-assessment here. Did we actually uphold those principles that we were aspiring to? Finding hidden notes in banned books, giving us a B on that because it's a treasure hunt, and to locate where in the library those books are, it is knowledge-based. So that's the only way you're going to do it. However, it was pretty linear because we made it a treasure hunt, which worked really well for the narrative, but we realized in retrospect that a scavenger hunt would be non-linear, whereas a treasure hunt is linear. And so this is one thing we're thinking of changing for our Unity build of the game. The queer history puzzle, I'm going to give that one an A. I mean, maybe just because I designed it, I'm a little biased, but I think, so that one, there's a fun fact about that people don't realize at first, is you don't actually need to go around collecting all these items and exploring all these spaces. If you already know what the mechanism is, and you know your history it's really history of banned books, actually, you can get through there very quickly. Author's puzzle, also, it's a Lost Woods puzzle. That's pretty Metroidbrainia in my mind. Endgame content, we were on a game jam schedule, and so we're like, okay, we need somehow to gate the final content of this game, the last sequence. We need to know that the player has done everything else to get there. If we were being good Metroidbrainia designers, we would have had some test that incorporates all the deep knowledge you've gained from other places. We didn't really have time to architect that. It was a lock and key. You literally got a key card. So I'm going to give us a lower grade on that, but there was a reason for it. We knew what we were doing. And yeah, the overall structure, we made it feel a little bit nonlinear. There was some backtracking. You have to sometimes go back and I've seen book carts around. Now you need to go take another look at those book carts. Or you don't just go through the floors of the library in order. It's sort of out of order. But there's backtracking, kind of circular, but it is still fairly linear, so giving that a middle grade. So that kind of shows you how we were thinking about it and what our self-assessment is. So we definitely learned a lot from the process. And part of our learning from the process is we did a lot of play testing. I'm a huge proponent of play testing. Especially when you're making a cerebral or psychological game, a narrative game, you just don't know how it's going to hit anyone else until you put them down in front of it. So we had around 10 playtesters who went all the way through, and we interviewed them about it. We also exhibited at Play NYC, and that was a really helpful way to watch people engage as well. So people really liked the metaphorical gameplay. The first time you open a book and it's not just text, you're actually going through this metaphorical space with words and graphics flying past you. People are like, oh, this isn't the kind of game I thought it was. People liked the narrative themes. We had a school librarian play this game. We've had teachers play the game, and people who work in academia, and they were getting mad in the right places where they were supposed to get mad, and happy in the places where they were supposed to be happy. So that was cool to see. Almost all of the credit for the writing goes to Nat, and there are just so many nice touches in the writing that people really responded well to. So, it's a puzzle game, it's an exploration game, but ultimately it's a Bitsy game with a lot of writing, a lot of internal monologues, a lot of artifacts that have writing, and that I think really shone through. And I think people liked the history puzzle. I was surprised that most people figured it out. No one seemed to think that was boring and easy, but most people kind of got the idea without too much nudging. And every time I saw that happen, I was partying inside a little bit. I was like, yes, the design worked. And we used all free Creative Commons music, a lot of Kevin MacLeod. But we picked that music very carefully, sifted through lots and lots of different music tracks, and it brought a lot to the game. So one of the ways we extended Bitsy was to allow sound effects and background music, and people really liked that as well. So what didn't work? Math. One playtester explicitly told us, this game is making me feel like I'm taking a pop quiz and I don't like it. And even people who enjoyed the math and thought they were good at it, every single one of them screwed it up, like everyone. And then I had to be like, just check that one more time. And they were like, oh, it's plus, not times. So we took the math out of the game. That's no longer part of the treasure hunt. This is one downside to using Bitsy. It's actually not, it's very disorienting all on its own. So we wanted to make it interesting when something like surreal happens, when you go through an impossible space. But in Bitsy, everything is just like, it's like, oh, I guess that might have been over there before, I'm not sure. So downside to Bitsy as a 3D game engine. It also just made backtracking unfun because people didn't want to have to keep retracing their steps in Bitsy. Nonlinear exposition is clearly something we're still learning about. It was possible, for example, to miss that one of the characters had a friend named Jax, and then Jax is referenced later in the game, and some people were like, who? And we're like, their best friend Jax? You don't know? But they just like didn't read that piece of content, so we had to think more about that. Originally, the author's puzzle required more outside knowledge. I mentioned why that's bad already, so we did rework it to include that information in the game. Just having a conversation with Scott about how escape rooms should work that way too. Everything you need to know should also be in the escape room. So we wanted to aspire to that. There's no inventory system in Bitsy really, no like visual inventory where you can pull things out and look at them and review them. So people had to remember a lot. That wasn't great for metroidbrainia especially. We didn't have our like ship's log from Outer Wilds. And narratively, yeah. We had some room to improve the kind of narrative integration of the puzzle areas into the rest of the library. We had an idea of what mind dungeons were and what threw Ruby into these kind of altered mental states, but there was ambiguity about like how is Ruby learning things in these spaces? Are they like an internal mind space? Are they external? So that's something that we have already revised for our Unity version of the game. So just got a couple minutes left here. I'll try to get through these last few slides. Sorry if we don't have time for questions, but please come find us afterwards. So Bitsy was really good for fast design development, but it also created this feeling of a fast game pace as you're playing through. People didn't want to stop and smell the roses sometimes. It's kind of just like walk, interact, read, walk, interact, read. And so in a way, using this kind of lightweight small game engine also, it did really affect the gameplay experience as well, and that wasn't entirely what we wanted. There were a number of constraints that we bypassed by basically rebuilding the engine. Like I made a lot of engine modifications, so to allow for different lighting, to switch between inside and outside, library open, library closed, that was something we supported. To have dialogues that represent a handwritten note in a book or reading a sign versus an internal thought. We wanted to be able to string together dialogue that had these different kind of origins and make it very visually clear, like, okay, here's the sign and here's Ruby reacting to it. So we needed to have more dialogue styling. And we also wanted to improve the navigation so it's less disorienting, created less motion sickness. I'm not going to talk about that right now. It's a thing we tried to do. And tons of other things, which if anyone has questions afterward, I'm happy to talk about any of all these other engine changes we made. So we didn't use Bitsy, we didn't use Bitsy 3D, we didn't use Bitsy 3D Color. We made our own Bitsy 3D Plus. We forked the forked fork, as we said. And we are hoping to have a full release of that. We use Bitsy Savior to manage our Bitsy versions. And this is available. You can use the version of the engine we used. It's a little bit messy right now because some of it was just like what I did for us to use on a Game Jam timeline. So I would like to just make it a little bit more usable for everyone and have a full release. But it's already out there. We might return to the Bitsy prototype. It is just a prototype. We're supposed to be making the game in Unity, but we kind of fell in love with what we made in Bitsy, so it's hard to step away from it. Like we kind of want to keep iterating on it, so that might happen. But yeah, mostly our sites are set on Unity, complete rebuild using everything we learned, good metroidbrainia practice, good nonlinear storytelling, and we're very proud to be a part of the NYU Game Center's incubator program for the coming year, which will provide support for us as we do that. So there you have it. That's our presentation. Feel free to check out our studio at unquietgames.com. Reach out to either Nat or me. And again, we would love to answer questions when we have time outside of this lecture hall.